Feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of being a single parent? You are not alone. Welcome to Single Parent Reset, the podcast that helps you navigate the ups and downs of single parenthood and find the balance that you deserve. Whether you're a single parent, co-parent or solo parent, this is the show for you. I'm Orla and I'm a life coach for single parents and a single parent myself. I know how hard it can be, but I believe every single parent has the strength to create a life that they are proud of. For more information about me and the work that I do, please visit my website solascoaching.com. That is SOLAS coaching.com. In each episode of this podcast, we'll be shining a light on the unique struggles single parents face and cover the aspects of being a single parent that are often overlooked and left unspoken. I'll be sharing actionable steps to help you overcome these challenges and find more calm and fulfillment in your life. Single Parent Reset is your weekly opportunity to gain a fresh perspective, take back control, and feel more in charge of your journey. Do you ever feel stuck? Like single parenthood has put limits on what you can do. It's a feeling that so many single parents experience. That weight of responsibility can feel so heavy and even claustrophobic. But today, I want to flip that perspective. What if I told you that single parenthood also brings a level of freedom that you may not have even considered yet? In this episode, we're going to explore how to recognise that freedom and to truly embrace it in your own life. In today's episode, I have a guest joining me. Julia Love from Alliance Family Mediation has come along today to talk all about mediation, explain what it is and why you would even use it. Julia talks through step by step what the process is even like when it comes to mediation. And what I love about this conversation is Julia really brings home the idea that mediation is not a sense that you failed. It is actually a positive step towards moving forward in your separation. So listen now to Julia's wise words all about mediation and how it is actually, in fact, a positive thing that you can do when you're separating. Welcome, Julia, to Single Parent Reset.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate you coming to take the time today to talk all about you and what you do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So first of all, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about you and what made you become a mediator.
Okay, so I had a very different background to what I kind of currently do. So I used to manage pubs and restaurants before sort of, pre-children. And when I think it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I was asked to do some admin, do some sort of PA role for a family mediator. Mm-hmm. And I'd never really heard of family mediation up until that point. I'd heard of mediation, but not in the kind of family context. And I think just discovering what it does, how it can help families, parents, couples that are going through such difficult times, I just kind of really fell in love with the concept of family mediation. I was a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was quite young. It was a really difficult time. And I think, again, kind of discovering that there was another way of doing things, that there was other options rather than going through the court system, just really kind of ignited a passion in me that I wanted to help families and couples and parents that were going through such difficult times. And I think really within the first few weeks of kind of doing that admin role, I'd really kind of decided that this was something that I wanted to go on and train to become.
Oh, amazing. Oh, I love how you went from pubs to this.
Yes,
slightly different.
But I think in some ways, kind of managing, sort of staff and pubs and things like that, it actually helped in some ways. So yeah, it was quite a change. But yeah, I absolutely love what I do. So
amazing. And what do you think makes mediation so crucial for single parents or separating parents, I should say?
Yeah, I think it just enables them to have some control back over perhaps in a situation that they feel they are really out of control. There's so much information coming from so many different kind of places. that it can be really hard to kind of know what the way forward it is for them. So I think it's empowering them to kind of take control of that. And obviously to be able to keep them out of the court system is paramount, because that can be incredibly stressful for the families, for children involved there as well. And it can further damage perhaps an already damaged relationship further than kind of where they are at that moment in time. Going through that court system can really kind of damage any future co-parenting relationships there as well. So yeah, empowerment definitely, and just to try and make a difficult situation as, you know, not as easy, because it's not easy, but to try and make it less stressful for them.
Yeah, amazing. I like that idea of getting control back somewhat, because it does feel that when you're separating, I know it's very common to feel like you've completely lost control of everything. So to feel like there's some sense of control, so there is things that you can do to help you feel more empowered. That's amazing. That's really good. And then I'm wondering, what are the kind of biggest challenges that single parents face when they're trying to resolve conflicts with an ex-partner?
I think sometimes it's kind of trying to step away from things that have happened in the past. It's perhaps trying to kind of draw a line and to move away from the past disputes, maybe the reasons that the relationship has sadly broken down, and trying to kind of focus it in a different way, to kind of really try to focus on what they're trying to achieve in terms of that future co-parenting relationship. And that's not easy, because things have happened and things can't just be forgotten that's been, that's happened in the past. But I guess that's one of the kind of common difficulties and challenges, is where people are really kind of fixed on things that have happened in the past.
And then how would you help them with your mediation to help people kind of focus on the important things, or not focusing on the past? What are the things that you do?
So I think it's really to try and focus on why they're doing this. Perhaps that they are trying to keep away from the court system, that they are making the decisions themselves, and trying to, especially if there's children involved, it's kind of really trying to see it through the eyes of the children in terms of making those decisions and having those conversations, really focusing on their interests and obviously the needs of the children. Again, that's not easy. And I think as well that the way that I mediate is very much about finding solutions. It's very much about trying to kind of not focus on the problems so much, but trying to really focus on the different ways of them being able to solve those problems that they're having.
Okay, so we're being solution focused.
Yes, very much.
And you mentioned there the kind of courts. So what is the difference between mediation and the courts? Like, what are the big differences?
Expense, I would say, is one of the big differences. Absolutely, the amount of time that it takes as well. At the moment, court cases anywhere between 9 to 12 months until you get an outcome. Whereas through mediation, most issues, most agreements that are made within between 3 to 5 meetings. It's certainly something that can be done a lot quicker. It's certainly a lot cheaper. And again, it's the actual parents and the clients actually making the decisions themselves, rather than a judge and a court making those decisions for them.
And when you go through mediation, at the end, is what you decide, is that legally binding, or what is the process there?
So all of the decisions that are made in mediation in terms of arrangements for the children, and the property and the finances, which we try as much as we can to kind of keep separate in terms of sort of going through the process of mediation, we try to kind of deal with them as separate kind of conversations. But any of those decisions that they then make in mediation can then go on to become legally binding.
Right.
Difference is that they're not going through the courts in terms of lots of hearings, asking for the courts to decide. They can then present their agreements that are drafted at the end of mediation, and those agreements can then be presented to the courts by consent, which means that they're both in agreement to the proposals that they're putting forward to the courts, and then it would be down to the courts to then obviously sign those off as legally binding orders.
Right. So rather than doing it like separately in the courts, back and forth, you're doing it together with you in the room, and then you go to the court, say, this is what we decided together. And it's right, I see.
Yeah, so it's a consent order rather than asking the courts to make an order for them. The courts have to agree with their decision. So it has to be in terms of child arrangements. It has to be very much about in the best interest of the child. It has to be safe. And with the property and the finances, if they're going through a divorce, it needs to adhere to the Section 25 Matrimonial Causes Act. So although they're making the decisions, the courts have to ensure that those agreements are fair and that they adhere to those points of it being legally binding.
Right. Okay. And then I guess one thing for me that I'd love to know is what for you are the common misconceptions that people come to you with mediation thinking, okay, this is what you're going to do for me. And you're like, that's not what I do. So what are those common misconceptions?
I would say probably the main one is that I'm going to make the decisions.
Right. Okay.
Often clients will really kind of want to come in and put their point across and their side of the story, in the expectation that perhaps I'm then going to take all of that information from both sides and then make a decision. Obviously, that's not the role of a mediator. That is the role of a judge. And so that would be something that would really kind of come into play with the courts. So I would say it's that I'm going to make the decisions, but it's going to be down to me to also give legal advice. So mediators are there to provide lots of legal information and share lots of legal knowledge in order to help the clients to make the decisions. Again, we cannot advise. We can't say, we think you should be doing this, or do you feel that, perhaps you should be doing that? It is very much a self-determined process, and we're not there to decide. We're there to help in that decision making.
Right. Okay. So you're not giving kind of that final answer. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then one thing that I was wondering is mediation like a last point of call? Like, when should people be considering it? Do you need to be in extreme high conflict with your separated partner? Or do people come with more low level conflict things as well? Like, what level do you need to be at to come to mediation?
I think it's as soon as you realize that you're perhaps not on the same page. But that said, mediation can also be incredibly helpful for people, even if they do agree, especially regarding if they're looking to get that legal outcome, maybe for the financial order as part of the divorce, or even a separation agreement or a child arrangements order, because we're there to kind of help them sense check. We have to follow a legal process in terms of what the courts would use. So we're very, very much there to kind of provide all of that information and that structured legal information as well, to help them make sure that the agreement that they are perhaps making or have already made is going to be sealed off by the courts. So we're not just there for when they don't agree. And I would say kind of accessing mediation earlier rather than later can perhaps help for them to make those arrangements and agreements sooner rather than later as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting to know, because I think my preconception would be we're not speaking this as a disaster, therefore we need mediation. But actually that's interesting to hear that you can, even when you are agreeing, it might speed things along a bit more and make things easier further down the line to approach mediation. That's great.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if it's got to the point where the communication has completely broken down, then that can sometimes make mediation a little bit more difficult. And so getting to kind of accessing mediation before you get to that point is going to be really helpful for people.
Okay. And then when you get to the point then, so it's decided, right, we're doing mediation, what does that process look like?
So the very first step before anybody can come into mediation is that they would have to individually attend a meeting called a MIAM. So that is a mediation information and assessment meeting. It's a private and confidential meeting that I have to have with both parties separately before we can kind of move on to mediation. It's so that I can provide lots of information about the process, about other options available as well. And it's also for me to kind of assess suitability to make sure that mediation is going to be safe and appropriate. After they've had their individual MIAMs, as long as mediation's been deemed suitable and both parties want to progress, we then move into the actual mediation process itself. Now, if there are children involved in those discussions, that's where I can then access a government voucher of £500 for clients. And that, in essence, gives them 2 hours of mediation completely free. As I mentioned earlier, to go through mediation between 3 to 5 meetings is kind of the average amount. Obviously, it depends on what they're discussing, how much sort of finances and things like that are involved. But we would then just work through the mediation process. And again, it's very much at the client's control of pace. So we would have a meeting when they're ready to have a meeting. Some clients will have a meeting every month. I've worked with other clients that want things done a lot sort of quicker, or perhaps other clients that want to go at maybe a slower pace. So it's very much, again, down to the actual participants to determine how quickly we go through that process. And then if mediation is finalised, if agreements have been reached, which in 92% of cases mediation is successful, I would then move on to drafting the documents, and it would then be a case of deciding where they want to go from there in terms of legalising the agreements that they've made.
Okay. And then in terms of the actual process, so the initial meeting, the MIAM meeting, is that what's called?
It's the MIAM, yeah.
Yeah. And the initial meeting you do separately, and then all the following on meetings from there, are you in the same room or online or same Zoom meeting together? Are you always together then for the rest of the meetings, you and the separating partner?
So that would depend on the kind of the result of the MIAM.
Right.
So most mediations are jointly attended. So most mediation meetings are now online, which in my kind of experience, I think people prefer because they're not physically sat in the room with the other party. So that can make them sort of feel more relaxed and in control of the process. So we have the option of joint mediation, and that's where both parties would join from a separate place, but obviously we'd all be in the same meeting together. Or we can also offer shuttle mediation. And the way that shuttle mediation works is that they wouldn't be in the same meeting at the same time. So I would use the waiting room, on Zoom, and I would then shuttle between the two of them in 10 to 15-minute intervals.
Right. Okay. So you can do it that way as well. So you're not both in the same room.
And that can be really helpful if there's non-molestation orders in place, if there's badly been domestic violence, if there's bail conditions. It means that people can still access mediation in a safe environment. They're not going to see or hear the other party. And again, that's something that's really encouraged as long as it's suitable, which again, it would be discussed in the actual MIAMs individually.
Okay. And then I'm wondering as well for like preparing for a mediation session. So from my point of view as a coach, what I'm thinking how to prepare will be, beforehand, making sure that you've got an hour or two, if possible, to just kind of get yourself in the right headspace, make sure you're as neutral as possible for it. And then afterwards, once you close that Zoom call, maybe making sure you don't have a really high stakes work meeting afterwards, or you're not going straight to school pickup, and just making sure you've got boundaries in place either side of that meeting to make sure that whatever comes up, you have the time and space afterwards to kind of digest that information. But what, in terms of from a mediator's point of view, how can you best prepare for these meetings or sessions?
I think it's kind of really focusing on helping the clients to work together these sort of issues and perhaps problems as shared. That it's very much about them both to kind of try to navigate and work out ways of being able to kind of meet somewhere in the middle there. I think it's really important, as you said, Orla, to kind of make sure that after the meeting they haven't then going on to something that's going to be kind of really difficult, because it can be very emotional. It can be quite stressful for the clients as well, perhaps if they're kind of really dealing with difficult sort of issues and topics. So I think it's kind of coming in terms of having quite an open mind, of not coming in again with that fixed position of this is never going to work, how are we ever going to reach an agreement. I think it's, again, just trying to kind of put that to one side and seeing this as a different way of perhaps trying to see whether things can be resolved, but absolutely taking that time emotionally and just being kind of kind to yourself as well. It's not coming in with that pressure that you've got to reach an agreement. That doesn't always happen. Certainly not in the first couple of meetings. It's about sometimes just trying to kind of focus and think of things in a different way rather than putting that pressure on that you've got to reach an agreement in that first meeting.
That's good to know. Is like, don't put the pressure on this meeting that we have to get there at the end, that there are other sessions. And you said that as well. So the first two sessions you can get a £500 voucher for if there's children involved. Is that right?
So after they've had the MIAM, so
Yeah.
once both individually attended the MIAM, I can then access a government voucher of
Yeah.
£500.
Mhm.
That allows them to have 2 hours of mediation.
Jesus.
So
Yeah.
we quite often will start with children first because they're really important in any discussions. And also, I don't need the clients to gather any financial information to help them to have those really important discussions. So
Mhm.
the government voucher it can and is normally then for 2 hours, and that allows them to then use that government voucher. We always have a break about halfway through, and we can have as many breaks as what the clients sort of need to have as well, just to kind of keep everything as comfortable for them as what it can be.
That's good to know that there's breaks rather than you're just all in for 2 hours. It can be
Yeah, it's a
challenging.
lot.
Yeah. And how do you deal with if there's a huge imbalance of power in certain things, for example, the financial side of things or the emotional side of things, or if how do you deal with that when it's really presenting itself in the meetings?
I think it's just being aware, and it's very common, especially with the finances, that perhaps um, either one party's kind of really been in charge of the finances, so therefore the other party maybe isn't so kind of clued up on what that financial position looks like. Throughout the meetings, it's very visual, so I do sort of share notes, I do share sort of spreadsheets and things like that, so they're both very much on an even kind of path in terms of looking at what the finances and these discussion sort of topics look like actually on the shared screen. So hopefully that will kind of help if there is a little bit of a power imbalance there. But I
Mhm.
think, again, this is the importance of having that MIAM so that I can really talk to both clients individually about any concerns, any worries that they have. And then I can be aware of that throughout the process and to help to kind of, bridge that gap between them.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like that Mayam's a really good starting point for both parties to kind of almost get a lot off their chest. So I'm sure it maybe feels like
Yes.
a therapy session sometimes.
Yeah, it is a lot because they're really, opening up to me. So they have to be able to trust. There's a lot of kind of, I'm asking them really personal questions, and I'm always very aware of that. And I always feel very privileged that they're allowing me to help them at such a difficult time. But I think, again, it's by having those personal conversations with them both individually first that I can then really kind of get a feel of what I can do to help them to the best of my ability.
And what about if the other separation partner doesn't want to do mediation? Is there any way that you can move forward with mediation if the other party is not wanting to engage in it?
Unfortunately not, because we do need both parties to want to come to mediation. Mediation is a completely voluntary process.
Hmm.
So once one party has attended a MIAM, the next step after that meeting would then be to reach out to the other party. If the other party unfortunately declines to attend a MIAM, then one of the options that the party that has attended a MIAM has at that point is they can then submit an application to the courts. That application can then be submitted as long as it's within 4 months of attending that MIAM, or even if they come into mediation and unfortunately it breaks down, they have a 4 month kind of cutoff for that MIAM for application purposes at that point. So it would then, unfortunately, perhaps need to move into the court system if the other party was not willing to engage in mediation and attend that MIAM. The other options are they can, of course, use solicitors. There's the option of collaborative law. There's also the option of arbitration and the court system. So, unfortunately, quite often it would then perhaps go down the court route because the other processes that are kind of offered there would mean that the other party would need to engage in that as well. If they decided that they weren't going to perhaps respond to solicitors, then that may not be the right process either.
Right. Okay. So it really has to be both parties agreeing to the mediation for it to actually work. You
Yeah,
both needs to be involved.
absolutely.
And the next steps would then potentially go into legal proceedings.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned as well, children. So I think it's any separating parents, children is a huge focus as to what the new childcare arrangement is going to be. Are children ever involved in the mediation processes? And are children ever in the room, or what is their part to play in the mediation that you do?
So we offer child inclusive mediation
Hmm.
through the mediation process. It's very much encouraged by the courts. where children have a right really to have their voices heard in the process. So children 9 and above can be offered the opportunity to be involved in child inclusive mediation. Child inclusive mediation is completely voluntary for children. It's not something they have to do if they don't want to do it. But it can be incredibly helpful for children to have their voices heard in an environment away from mum and dad. So it would just be the child and the child inclusive mediator.
Yeah.
And allows them space to be able to offload and say what they really feel about things. Because quite often children will tell mum what they think mum wants to hear and what's going to keep mum happy and not make mum sad. And then they'll tell dad what they think dad wants to hear and what's going to, keep dad happy as well, because it's just a natural reaction for children that they want to protect their parents. So therefore, sometimes mum and dad are hearing different things from their children. And that can sometimes fuel the kind of difficulty of reaching an agreement between mum and dad. So it allows children to have that space, although it is completely confidential. So mum and dad will not receive any feedback from that meeting unless the children or child wanted there to be feedback. So it's not there to help the parents to make the decision. If they receive feedback, that's almost like a bonus for children if they want them to have that information. But it just allows them to have that space and to be able to speak freely. Even if children don't want to do that, the power can be that they've been asked, because it is showing children that mum and dad are talking, mum and dad are working with a mediator, things are going to be sorted out, there's going to be some structure and plans put in place. So that can be really positive for children, even if they don't want to be involved in the process.
Yeah, so they're seeing that their parents are working together to make it work.
Yes, absolutely.
And do both parents need to agree for their child to go through? So say, for example, the mum's like, absolutely, I want the child to be involved in this, but the dad's like, I do not want the child to be like in the mediation room or being asked questions. How does that work if there's a disagreement about the level of involvement that children have?
So yes, absolutely, both parents need to give consent for the mediator to then approach the child to ask them whether this is something that they want to have. If one parent says no, then we can't go ahead with that. But just to kind of mirror, as we do it through mediation, we always have to mirror how it would be dealt with in the court process. Right. And if unfortunately things needed to move into the court, there wouldn't need to be that consent from mum and dad for a body called CAFCAS to get involved in that process. The courts more than ever at the moment are wanting to hear the voice of a child, because these decisions are about them, these conversations are about them. So they very much want children to be involved. And that's not to say that children would ever be asked to make adult decisions. We're not there to ask them to choose between mum and dad. It's just allowing them to have their voices heard, because that can be really important in terms of through mediation and through the court system, in terms of those decisions being made either by mum and dad in mediation or by the judges in the court process.
And that's so, and then when they go to court, then that consent almost goes away from the parents, because it's
absolutely
right. Okay.
They would be involved in some way, shape or form. Even quite young children, they would be involved perhaps in different methods rather than actually speaking to them. Schools would be involved, perhaps some sort of play therapy or something like that, in terms of just trying to find out what children want to be heard about, what their voices are saying about perhaps separation and things that are happening.
And what advice then would you have for parents who are potentially going through a high conflicts mediation process and want to protect their children throughout that? What advice would you have?
So I think, we have to be very careful as mediators, because we're not allowed to advise as such. But I think it's very much about just be aware of all the options, rather than thinking that court is the only option, that is, unfortunately, if they can't agree, that's where they're going to head. I think attending that MIAM and having that mediation information and assessment meeting can be incredibly useful, because we're not just telling people about mediation, we're also telling them about the other options and how they would work as well. So I think it's just really being aware of everything that they could be doing, and seeing mediation as a positive solution, not seeing it as something that unfortunately they've failed at in terms of not being able to reach an agreement, and then they've got to come to mediation, and kind of seeing that as something bad, seeing that they failed in some way because they couldn't agree. It's very much about seeing it as a positive influence, and being able to help them to reach those decisions, and be able to move on to a really kind of positive co-parenting relationship in the future, because that is only going to benefit their children. It is going to allow children to then look back on that relationship, perhaps when they're older and maybe they have children of their own, and kind of seeing that as a blueprint for how they want their relationship to be for their children as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love the idea of seeing it as it's not a negative thing, mediation. You haven't failed. It's an absolute positive step.
Yeah.
It's like the catalyst to getting you to the new co-parenting dynamic that you're going to have for your family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions I always ask when clients come into mediation for child arrangements, one of the questions that I always ask them, and it's quite a thought-provoking question, is perhaps in the future, if your child was having a conversation with somebody, perhaps at work or at university, and they were asked about your relationship as co-parents, what would you hope for them to say? And it's kind of that moment where hopefully parents will say, well, actually, I want it to be positive. I want my child to look back and say, it was okay. Mum and dad weren't together, but I had a great time with mum, I had a great time with dad, and things were okay. Sometimes that has to be done through, it's not always easy. And sometimes we have to kind of bite our lip with the person that perhaps we've been in that relationship with, and sadly it's broken down. But it's always about putting that at the forefront of your minds in thinking about, what would your child remember from this? What would you want them to remember?
Yeah, you don't want your child to remember that mum won or dad won.
No, and it was difficult, and you felt in the middle, and it was very, very high conflict, and you felt awkward talking about dad to mum and mum to dad. It's kind of, and it's not easy. It's not an easy process, but we're here to help with that. And once that's been achieved, it can form a really positive relationship as co-parents.
Amazing. And then if you are dealing with a co-parent or entering into a co-parenting relationship with someone who you have been in conflict with previously, what communication strategies could you give to people embarking on their co-parenting journey together that potentially have had toxic communication in the past?
Okay. I think co-parenting apps are fantastic. There's some really brilliant kind of co-parenting apps out there that allow that contact to be very much contained. So it's spilling out into WhatsApp and emails and text messaging and things like that. They allow the use of calendars, galleries, for sharing pictures and things like that. So I think co-parenting apps are fantastic. I think it's quite often, if something is perhaps bubbling into a dispute between you both, I think it's allowing yourself that time before responding. I think having that break between responding, perhaps sleeping on it, perhaps kind of looking at that text message or something the next day. Quite often with text messages, they are notoriously misread because we read them depending on what mood we're in and what's happened in our day. And so I think allowing that kind of pause before replying. Another thing that comes up quite often is expectations in terms of replying to a text message or keeping that communication really contained if it is just about the children. And again, not spilling out into things that have perhaps happened in the past.
I love that term, spilling out, as in, just keep it in its glass and it stays there. I think that's, very true. And one tip that I always like is even asking yourself, do I even need to reply to this? Sometimes it doesn't even need a warrant to reply, or it doesn't really, or do I need to reply right now? I think is a really effective way. Apps are also a great way to keep it so that it's not spilling out. It's just because there's nothing worse than constantly having maybe somebody who you are in conflict with who's constantly sitting at the top of your WhatsApp every time you open it. That's actually really good.
And it's referring back to that as well. If you have something like an app, everything is kept within that. So if there is a question asked or forgotten what time the pickup is on Saturday after the party or whatever it may be, you've got one reference to go back to and everything is there. Nothing can be deleted. The courts are starting to kind of really implement these co-parenting apps within court orders as well. So they really kind of see the value in that, of having that communication that is there to keep you on track as well, because it can't be deleted. It makes you a little bit more accountable, perhaps, for the language and the words that are being used.
Yes, you almost have all the information there, which is, makes things easier. And then if someone is struggling now with conflict and they've been trying to do mediation, or they're about to embark on mediation, or they're just not sure of what they can do right now, what's one step they could take today to help them move forwards to get to a more harmonious future with their separating partner?
So I think if the relationship is definitely over, if there's no chance of sort of reconciliation, then again, I think attending a MIAM is incredibly helpful, so that you can gain all that information. There's lots and lots of information on the Family Mediation Council website. That's where you'll find regulated mediators as well. I think it's really important to understand that mediators should be regulated, especially in terms of family mediation, because of the alignment there with the court process. I think research, just find out as much information as you can, and just really consider mediation as a positive step, rather than something that you perhaps feel you have to do, or that you're just being aware of it as well, just kind of finding out that information.
Yeah, I think that, that is my main takeaway from this, that mediation is a positive step. It's taking back control. It's an empowering thing to do. And it's positive for your children to see that you're working together to make a better future for you guys. So I think that's brilliant. And my last question for you, this has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about mediation. But my last question for you is, where can the listeners find you, hear more about you, and work with you? Where is that information, and how can they connect with you?
Okay, so my service, alliancefamilymediation.uk. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. You can book a call with me through the website. I offer a free 10-minute consultation call. It's really an information, sort of just a chat, very informal, just to see if I can answer any questions. You can also book a MIAM with me directly through the website as well. And I'm also listed on the Family Mediation Council website and on the Family Mediation Association website as well. So you can find me really sort of everywhere throughout any of those processes.
Amazing, Julia. Thank you so much. I'm sure people will be looking you up now. And like I said, it's been just so interesting to hear it broken down, what the process is like, why people come to you, and what happens when it doesn't work. And like I said, just hearing mediation in a positive light, I think has been, not that people think of it negatively, but hearing how it can be a really positive thing has been amazing to hear. So thank you so much for coming on Single Parent Reset, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Orla. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, how fantastic is Julia? Honestly, I just love how she speaks about mediation being a positive thing. You haven't failed. It's actually a good step in the right direction in terms of your separation, and it's showing how you can work together towards getting the best outcome for you and your family. I love it. So she's Julia Love. She's Alliance Family Mediation. Check her out now. Book in your free 10-minute consultation with her and find out how you can work with her towards getting to that conflict-free separation that you so much desire. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Single Parent Reset. You have taken 15 minutes out of your day to do something for you, and that alone is a step in the right direction towards living a life you deserve. If you're interested in working with me one-to-one, please go to my website solacecoaching.com for further details. And don't forget to follow my Instagram page @solacecoaching for more insightful content on living a life to be proud of as a single parent. As always, if you find this episode useful, please share with your friends and family. Remember, many single parents may seem like they have it all together, but this could be exactly what they need to help them move forward today.